Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So let me check my sound. This story is a couple of days old, but I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to add my voice to this. Because I think some people should be ashamed of themselves. Literally, I think they should be ashamed of themselves. And they need to be called out. This bill, for all proclamations of resistance, and resisting the tide and pushing back against the Trump agenda and all this other stuff. This bill that Bernie Sanders put forward was essentially Congress reclaiming its congressional and philosophical responsibility to maintain or to prevent the president from just being a king and go gallivanting around the globe anytime the president wants to gallivant around the globe. In this very specific instance, we're talking about Yemen. Bernie Sanders, working across the aisle with Republican Mike Lee, put out a bill to pull the United States support from Saudi Arabia. Essentially, stop helping Saudi Arabia murder and starve Yemenis. That was the point of the bill. This is, in fact, let's take you to Sanders introducing the bill. And yeah, there are some people at the end of these. I have 2 or 3 videos that I want you to see. There's some shaming that needs to take place. There's some public, outright shaming, particularly if you're talking about from the left. If you're talking about from the right, if you're unempathetic, it doesn't really matter. But if you're talking about from the left, and you're from this standpoint or this workable point of view that we need to stay out of those countries, we shouldn't be giving our blood and treasure to go into military conquest and knocking over democracies or knocking over governments. We can't deal with the consequences of those things. We don't even know always the consequences of those things. We shouldn't do it. Now, if you're the left or if you're the right, that perspective is a sane perspective. You even have Mike Lee, hard right Mike Lee, standing shoulder to shoulder with Bernie Sanders on this particular measure. We don't need to be killing and murdering Yemenis and helping Saudi Arabia to do so. Let's hear Sanders himself talk about this. And by the way, this is good politics, in addition to just being good from a humanitarian standpoint. Ultimately, yes, we should not be in the process of killing and murdering Yemenis. Yes. Outright. Yes. Clearly, yes. I don't want to work with Saudi Arabia to do such a thing. I think it's a heinous and disgusting thing. That being said, from a political standpoint, when you're talking about the left and you're talking about elements of the right, taking the hard left position is politically advantageous. The fact is, people don't want to be in those wars. The fact that you can get Mike Lee on it shows that people don't want to be in those wars. Across the political spectrum, they don't want to be in those wars. So Sanders, when you have, Cory Booker and Kamala Harris trying to stake out some lefty policies so they can compete with Sanders because they saw Hillary Clinton's failures and fuck-ups and foibles during the other campaign, they've analyzed that, hey, people need to believe that we're not getting paid and bought off. People need to believe that we're for healthcare. People need to believe that we're for certain things. Okay, that we'll pretend to be for those certain things. So how does Sanders respond to that? Sanders tacks to the left, saying, fine. If you're going to be for those things, great. I'm glad to have you. Now, I am also going to move to the left on issues of war. Meaning, yes, I want to get us out of the conflict with Yemen. And the conflict with Syria is questionable. I love the fact that he used the term. He's like, it's questionable. No, it's illegal. It's illegal. Let's just Sanders himself talk about it.
May not return home alive. And it goes without saying that every armed conflict that the United States of America is engaged in must be consistent with the Constitution of the United States and be lawful. Let us make no mistake about it. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution states in no uncertain terms that Congress shall have power to declare war. Congress shall have power to declare war. The Founding Fathers gave the power to declare war to Congress, the branch most accountable to the people. For far too long, Congress, under Democratic and Republican administrations, has abdicated its constitutional role in authorizing war. The time is long overdue for Congress to reassert its constitutional authority. And that is what Senators Lee, Senator Murphy, and I are doing with this privileged resolution that we are introducing. Many Americans are unaware that the people of Yemen are suffering today in a devastating civil war with Saudi Arabia and their allies on one side and Houthi rebels on the other. In November of this year, the United Nations Emergency Relief Coordinator said that Yemen was on the brink of, quote, the largest famine the world has seen for many decades, end quote. So far, at least 10,000 civilians have died and over 40,000 have been wounded in the war, and 3 million people have been displaced. Many Americans are also not aware that U.S. forces have been actively involved in support of the Saudis in this war, providing intelligence and aerial refueling of planes whose bombs have killed thousands of people and made this crisis far worse. We believe that as Congress has not declared war or authorized military force in this conflict, the United States' involvement in Yemen is unconstitutional and unauthorized, and U.S. military support of the Saudi coalition must end. Without congressional authorization, our engagement in this war should be restricted to providing desperately needed humanitarian aid and diplomatic efforts to resolve it. That is why today, Senator Lee and I and Senator Murphy are introducing a joint resolution pursuant to the 1973 War Powers Resolution calling for an end to U.S. support for the Saudi war in Yemen. The War Powers Resolution defines the introduction of U.S. armed forces to include, quote, the assignment of members of such armed forces to command, coordinate, participate in the movement of, or accompany the regular or irregular forces of any foreign country of government when such military forces are engaged or there exists an imminent threat that such forces will become engaged in hostilities, end of quote. Assisting with targeting intelligence and refueling airplanes as they bomb these targets clearly meets this definition.
Bernie Sanders, in this case, is trying to claw back powers, meaning the president has taken on certain powers. The president is out there gallivanting around the globe, but he doesn't really call it a war. He calls it something else. Even though he's using bombs and bullets and they're murdering people, all the same, they don't call it a war. They're sidestepping Congress in this. Sanders is saying that's bogus. Congress has the power of war and purse strings, and we are going to reassert that particular power. We don't want you murdering and bombing Yemenis. That's what it boils down to. And let's keep going. I don't think he has much more to say, but let's hear him out. Let's let him finish.
This is not a partisan issue. Support for the Saudi intervention in Yemen began under a Democratic president and has continued under a Republican president. Senator Lee is a conservative Republican. I am a progressive independent who caucuses with the Democrats. In November of last year, the House of Representatives, with a strong bipartisan vote, voted overwhelmingly for a non-binding resolution stating that U.S. involvement in the Yemen civil war is unauthorized. Only 30 members of the House voted against that resolution, and that is what we are saying today. We are in agreement with the vast majority of the Democrats and Republicans in the House. Here is the bottom line. If the President or members of Congress believe that support for this war is in the U.S. interest and that we should be involved in it, then let them come before Congress, let them make their case, and let the Congress vote on whether or not we stay in that war. I believe that we have become far too comfortable with the United States engaging in military interventions all over the world. We have now been in Afghanistan for 17 years, the longest war in American history. Our troops are now in Syria under what I believe are questionable authorities, and the administration has indicated that it may broaden that mission even more. The time is...
It's not questionable. It's illegal. It's not questionable. We have no right, no justification for being in Syria. It is not on the border of North Carolina. There are no barbarians at our gates. I'm trying to make this point. It's one thing if you make the argument that America is protecting itself. Calling it the Department of Defense, they should call it the Department of War. I mean, ultimately, that's what it is. These guys are going around knocking over or punching whatever country it wants. Europe gives it a complete pass. Everybody pretends as if the United States is not a maniac and a rogue nation. And then there's always the hypocrisy that Russia does something and automatically everybody's hair is caught on fire. Do you know they're expelling Russian diplomats in one country after the next, including the United States? expelling diplomats. It's fucking amazing. He's right. We're in these countries illegally. The president has taken on the powers to be, for all intents and purposes, a king. And Congress has completely abdicated its responsibility to make sure that the president is not a king. And understand why Congress does that. I mean, why this was put into the Constitution in the first place. The last thing they wanted is kings starting wars. You have one person just fucking around starting conflicts. They didn't want that. They wanted Congress themselves to own that particular responsibility. If you can convince all of these members of Congress that it's necessary, then fair enough. That's the apparatus that we have in order to make those decisions. But Congress no longer uses that authority. Congress has completely abdicated that particular authority to whoever president is in office. Meaning if that's Obama, if it's Bush, or if it's reality show host Donald Trump. The 2% or 1% of the United States population is in the military. The president, for all intents and purposes, has a private force that goes about the globe, killing and slaughtering. The rest of the population is not affected by this because we don't have a draft. So all intents and purposes, you have a small minority of the population that's affected by what the military does, not including blowbacks. Let's let him keep going. This is almost finished. But I like that. I guess my point is I like that. That's with all the Russia talk and everything else. I like him coming out saying what the United States is doing here is wrong. I don't care if this is for politics. I don't care if he believes it. The fact that it matters to me is he's doing it. And it's very possible that he does believe it. The thing is, though, if you make the case that the Syrian war is illegal, then the other wars also get the same treatment. How is one legal but the other one is not? Syria doesn't want us in their country. Russia has aligned with Syria. The United States has allied with terrorists. And the United States is in that country right now, breaking international law. Nobody's going to say anything. Nobody's going to sanction the United States. But that's precisely what is taking place. Now, this resolution, Sanders is right. Congress, the House, declares the United States military role in Yemen's civil war is unauthorized. So Sanders was absolutely right. The House itself came out and said, yeah, this is an unauthorized military conflict. You guys are working with Saudi Arabia to kill and starve Yemenis. This is unauthorized. Now, Sanders lost this. They lost. The lawmakers struck it down. Think about that. The United States is helping Saudi Arabia to starve and murder Yemenis. Saudi Arabia was instrumental, or at the very least played some role in the 9/11 attacks. Saudi Arabia has been spreading terrorism throughout that region of the world. Hillary Clinton in the WikiLeaks documents attested to such. And yet and still, they have a stranglehold over our politics, or at the very least a major influence in our politics. And this major influence exists whether you're talking about Democratic presidents or whether you're talking about Republican presidents. It doesn't matter. They're friends of both. We should not have anything to do with this war. If they want to murder and starve Yemenis, let them murder and starve Yemenis using their own resources, armaments, and skill. Get us out of it. They voted this bill down. Congress, once again, abdicated its responsibility for war, while at the same token giving a man, and Democrats allowed this to go through, by the way, meaning this bill would have went down if Democrats would have voted for it. I said this wrong. If Democrats had voted with Sanders, this bill would have passed. The House had already voted their part, meaning the House bill would likely have passed. I understand Republicans went along with this, but it was the Democrats that pushed them over the line to help this bill pass. We have some shaming to do. Let's take a look at this part. In fact, let me let you listen to Sanders arguing this in the well of Congress. This is when he's essentially, they brought this up to a vote, and they're having this argument in Congress about the bill itself. At this particular point, or this section, is he's talking about that war being unauthorized and illegal. Let's hear him. This is before I think they made their judgments.
Thank you. Mr. President, there should be no issue of more importance to members of Congress than the issue of war and peace, and when it is appropriate to send the young people of our country into harm's way, knowing that some of them will not return home alive. And it goes without saying that every armed conflict that the United States of America is engaged in must be consistent with the Constitution of the United States and be lawful. And let us make no mistake about it. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution states in no uncertain terms that Congress shall have the power to declare war. Congress shall have the power to declare war. The founding fathers gave the power to declare war to Congress because Congress is that body most accountable to the people. For far too long, Congress, under Democratic and Republican administrations, has abdicated its constitutional role in authorizing war. The time is long overdue for Congress to reassert its constitutional authority. If you think that a military intervention makes sense, then let us have that debate here on the floor of the Senate and in the House and cast a vote. But that is not what we have been seeing for a number of years. And what Senator Lee and Senator Murphy and I are doing with privileged resolution SJ 54 is demanding that Congress once again takes its constitutional responsibility for war and peace seriously. And I want to thank Senators Durbin, Senator Warren, and Senator Booker for coming on board that resolution. And I hope this bipartisan resolution will gain more and more support in the coming days. Mr. President, many Americans are unaware that the people of Yemen are suffering today in a devastating civil war with Saudi Arabia and their allies on one side and Houthi rebels on the other. In November of last year, the United Nations Emergency Relief Coordinator said that Yemen was on the brink of, quote, the largest famine the world has seen for many decades, end quote. So far, at least 10,000 civilians have died, 3 million have been displaced, and over 40,000 have been wounded in this war. 15 million people lack access to clean water and sanitation. More than 20 million people in Yemen, over 2/3 of that country's population, need some kind of humanitarian support, with nearly 10 million in acute need of assistance. More than 1 million suspected cholera cases have been reported. 1 million cholera cases have been reported, representing potentially the worst cholera outbreak in world history. Many Americans probably are also not aware that U.S. forces have been actively engaged in support of the Saudis in this terrible war, providing intelligence and aerial refueling of planes whose bombs have killed thousands of people and made this crisis far worse. We believe that, and I speak for Senator Lee and Senator Murphy, that as Congress has not declared war or authorized military force in this conflict, the United States' involvement in Yemen is unconstitutional and is unauthorized, and U.S. military support of the Saudi coalition must end. Without congressional authorization, our engagement in this war should be restricted to providing desperately needed humanitarian aid and diplomatic efforts to put an end to this terrible conflict.
What's wild about this is Congress, in voting this bill down, voted to give themselves less power, to be less involved in the process. That's weird to me. I mean, the president, when the president is trying to get power, the president pulls power. Now, just based on him taking that ability to go and drop bombs like that, he pulled power. He asserted a power. Now, Congress comes behind this and, for whatever reason, does not have the stones to do the same thing. Those Democrats voted to let this guy continue to bomb and starve Yemenis. Look, I understand that you had right-wing Republicans that pushed this bill through. Fair enough. But the group that pretends to be peaceniks, pretends to be moderates, pretends to be sober, those guys just voted to allow human beings to continue to be starved, continue to go without medical access, continue to be bombed, and using our men and women, leveraging their bravery in order to murder other human beings. That is a fucking disgusting thing. I understand that these guys are in suits and they're sitting in their offices and they have this cynical distance fully away from those things. I'm just taking a vote, but this vote is just a vote. No, that vote has real world consequences. Meaning there is a person who's going to get bombed, who's going to get killed. And I guarantee you, just from traveling in that area of the world, in Jordan, in Egypt, in Israel, in Palestine, they love their moms as much as we love our moms. They love their kids as much as we love our kids. They love their teachers and they get along with teachers. They have their same petty dramas between girlfriends and boyfriends. They eat their cereal. They argue with their wives and husbands. All of those things are the same. Now, yeah, there are permutations in how they behave in those things, but functionally, fundamentally, they're just human beings. They're just like us. Now, yes, they've been in a war zone for God knows how long, and yes, they've been getting killed, but fundamentally, they're just like us. They don't feel pain differently. They don't experience loss differently. When you see your mother blown to bits, or you see your aunt blown to bits, or cousin, sister, brother, whatever that connection is, whatever that tight engagement is, when you see that severed at the end of a bomb with a "Made in the United States" sticker on it, what are you to think? What are you to do in that situation? Is that really something that the United States needs to be a part of, meaning assisting in the murdering and the slaughtering of civilians? Those Democrats should be ashamed of themselves. Those deaths on the heads of each and every one of those Democrats who were out of cowardice or disinterest chose to go along with Republicans in killing this bill. In fact, let's name them. The people who went against this were, let's see. A disparate group of senators, Bernie Sanders, Mike Lee, Chris Murphy, drafted and introduced a resolution to stop America's support for the bloodshed. This is one of the greatest humanitarian disasters in our time, Sanders told Vox in an interview last week. But the GOP-controlled Senate voted to table, that is, kill the resolution that says America shouldn't assist Saudi Arabia in a 3-year fight against the Iranian-backed Houthis rebels in Yemen. By 55-44 margin, a majority of Republicans and some Democrats effectively said that the United States can help Riyadh by refueling its planes, providing intelligence in the Saudis' brutal air campaign. Supporters of the resolution claimed it would immediately end Americans' involvement in the war. Critics says it wouldn't. So far, the conflict has claimed more than 13,500 lives, many of them in airstrikes. Roughly 20 million Yemenis need humanitarian assistance to meet basic needs, including food and water, out of a pre-war population of 28 million, and nearly 1 million people are suffering from cholera. However, conditions are so bad that it's hard to believe, it's hard to have a reliable tally of these measures, which means the situation could be much, much worse. Part of the reason it's so hard to navigate Yemen's relentless bombing campaign. The Saudi military has conducted more than 145,000 missions in Yemen over the past 3 years. A Saudi general told the Wall Street Journal that about 100,000 of those combat missions, conducting about 300 missions per day. One human rights group counted around 16,000 Saudi airstrikes in total, killing thousands of civilians in total. I'm looking for the Democrats that went with. He didn't put him in the article? Wow, that's amazing. Looks like you would have put that in the article, buddy. You had Democrats who essentially voted to keep a bloody war going on. I understand that a Republican-led Senate killed it. But I want to know the Democrats who actually went along with that. Let's see. Let's do a search. I'm sorry. Democrats. To kill. To continue. Saudi Arabia. I want to know the names. Here we are. Let's see if this gives us the names. In a tight vote, Senate bucks Bernie and allows U.S. role in war to continue. Senator Bernie Sanders, Mike Lee, and Chris Murphy introduced the bill to end the American role in 3 weeks ago, and it attracted high-profile co-sponsors like Dick Durbin, Elizabeth Warren, Kristen Gillibrand, Cory Booker, and Dianne Feinstein. Now, mind, all of those people are purely on this because of presidential ambitions, meaning when you're talking about Booker, Feinstein, because you're going to find Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, and Kristen Gillibrand in everything. Anything that takes place, they're going to be doing those things in triplets because they want to maintain a balance with this kind of lefty thing. They need to be on these things, if that makes sense. They're planning on running for office. They need to be on these things, and they need to be considered lefty or progressive because they need to get through a primary, and they understand what's going to take place in that primary. Let's keep going. Fact is, the Sanders bill, though, and if Sanders didn't bring it up, it wouldn't have been brought up. But Senate leaders, notably top Senate Foreign Relations Committee figures Bob Corker and Bob Menendez, Democrat, said the proposal was too hasty and should return to committee, and the Trump administration invested heavily in convincing lawmakers it would be unwisely damage the American partnership with the Saudis. Menendez and 9 other Democrats, Senator Chris Coons, Catherine Cortez Masto, Joe Donnelly, Heidi Heitkamp, Joe Manchin, of course, Bill Nelson, of course, Jack Reed, Doug Jones. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. You barely beat a pedophile. And once you barely beat a pedophile, you get in voting to murder Yemenis abroad, voting to continue to allow the United States to help Saudi Arabia murder and starve Yemenis. Good job. Sheldon Whitehouse ultimately aligned with all but 5 Republicans to kill the bill. Chris Coons, Delaware, Catherine Cortez Masto, Nevada, Joe Donnelly, Indiana, Heidi Heitkamp, North Dakota, Joe Manchin, West Virginia, Bill Nelson, Florida, Jack Reed, Rhode Island, Doug Jones, Alabama, Sheldon Whitehouse, Rhode Island. Remember those Democrats. When they come out and they're asking and begging for your vote and they're talking about the Republican being horrible and everything else, remember that they're sitting in their ivory tower, and it's not an ivory tower, they're sitting in Congress, and they choose to make a vote. And the vote that they choose in their suits with all of the amenities that one needs to live a pretty decent life. There's food and bonbons in the kitchen at some point. There's food and bonbons anywhere in that general vicinity of Washington, D.C. It's air conditioned or heated, depending on which season that you're in. Everybody's wearing suits. Everybody has a formal demeanor. Everybody pays for their magnificent haircuts. Most of these people are millionaires. And they sit there and they take votes. And the votes they take, people act as if these votes are completely and utterly detached from a wider world. Now, in objective reality, those votes have meaning. Those votes have significance. And fact is, the vote that they took just then allowed Donald Trump, who they say is a Russian robot in a Russian plant and is being manipulated by Vladimir Putin, they allowed this guy, this Manchurian candidate, to have war powers in Yemen, illegally, by the way. We're helping Saudi Arabia murder and starve Yemenis. None of this has anything to do with the United States government at all. The president himself has taken the role of a king and made the decision that he's just going to do it. It is for Congress to restrain the powers of the president, and Congress failed to do so. Congress utterly failed to do so. Remember those Democrats. When those Democrats come shilling for your votes, those guys are the same people that allow the murder and the starving of Yemens to continue, leveraging the bravery of the United States military to do so. So, yeah. Why is nobody talking about the Iranian scandal where they murdered a scientist on American soil named Doc Brown? Marty McFly witnessed the whole thing. It's time for war. It is not time for war. I have no idea what you're talking about. This is not time for war. Even if what you're saying is true, I am still not in this camp of it's time for war. I mean, Jesus Christ, how many countries will be at war with us right now if we took that logic? How many people have we rubbed off the game board? We were renditioning people in foreign countries and dragging them to black sites. I'm trying to get across this idea of fairness. How on earth can the United States declare unilaterally that hey, it's time for war because something took place on our soil, but don't take that perspective when we do the same thing on somebody else's soil? This is schoolyard bullying of sorts, where the bully gets to make determination of the rules. How come nobody called the United States to account for killing 1 million Iraqis? How come? How come? Just making a point. It's not. Balthazar, how many neoliberals does it take to screw in the light bulb? None. Neoliberals and Republicans can only resist change. The last authorized war was World War II. Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Agreed, Balthazar. Yeah, man, that's appalling. That's fundamentally appalling. All of those Democrats should be ashamed of themselves. In fact, there's no word that gets across the level of shame that they should be experiencing. When they go to sleep at night, they should have nightmares of the bombs and the killings that they're visiting on other people. There should be consequences for taking legislative maneuvers in such a way. Meaning, if you're going to make a vote that says you're willing to bomb and kill and murder civilians abroad and you're okay with using the United States to do so, what does it say about you? Even if you're doing so for political reasons, even if you're doing so because you're incompetent and you can't necessarily see how that vote adversely affects somebody else. Either way, what does it say about the individual that would take a vote like that, knowing that vote is going to continue to kill and murder and starve and expose millions to a cholera epidemic? It's a hellish vote. And I say it says something about the quality of the individual that can vote to not pull those powers back, to not assert the dominance of Congress in regards to the declaration of wars. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Jamal, can you please use the term usual suspect next time? Kidata Belu. Okay, I'm going to just say Belu. Belu. I don't know what it applies to, Belu. MT Democrat Republicans are fighting for daddy's love. They're fighting for daddy's love. Chris Foster, the only way to make them listen is to hit them in the wallet. We all need to down tools as a unified protest of war and inequality. You know, during the time where there were when there was a draft, and they would pull those people into the draft, and you would have people pissed off. Now, if you're a mom, if you're a dad, if you're some member of the family, and they're trying to drag somebody who you love and care about off into a questionable war, well, you're going to feel some kind of way about that. And not just feel some kind of way about that, you're going to have a section of the population that gets up and does something about that. They're going to bitch, they're going to moan, they're going to complain, they're going to protest. You had Nixon barricading himself with buses all around the White House, talking about they're going to get me, Henry, talking about Kissinger. The moment that they took those away, meaning the moment that they said, okay, no more draft, then you've given the president a private army. And worse than giving the president a private army, you've put in a certain complacency in the public itself. It doesn't affect me, so I don't care. Meaning, yes, the president is using these people to bomb and all this other stuff. Is using special forces in other countries to undermine governments and kill certain people. The rest of the public of the country doesn't care. It doesn't affect us. We play our Xbox. We eat our Cheerios. We go to our jobs. We have sex with our wives or our girlfriends. It doesn't matter. It's part of the reason it doesn't matter is the disconnect. That's what I'm saying. You've disconnected the United States military from the population itself. So in one sense, the draft saying, yeah, we're not going to get random people in the military. At that point, you have just a person or people who agreed to go into the military. Well, all these people have agreed to this process. They're gung-ho. They're true believers. Now, the president himself, at that point, has free reign of the military. You have a public that doesn't really care because it doesn't necessarily touch the public. How do you restrain that particular process? I mean, ultimately, you've ended up with having a king again from military matters. All of these Democrats who went against this bill should be shamed They should not get your vote during re-election. They're in the process of making votes that it's hard to get across the tragedy that's taking place over there. It's almost like however bad you make it, you as an individual experiencing poverty, deprivation, cholera, bombings, having the loss of a kid or a loved one, you experiencing those things as a human being. What is the toll of that? How do you quantify that level of pain and angst within an individual based on the situation that's taking place? And do you really want us, the United States, in our military apparatus, whether it's materials, support, whatever, going into helping them? Yeah. Belu, Jamal, you need to read the appalling writing that the New York Times did in regards to the poisoning of the Russian expat. They are outraged of chemical use in European soil. Yeah, I've seen that, man. I read a little bit about that today. I've been following that story for the show. And the last thing that I saw was, or the last thing that I saw, they, subject verb agreement, for some reason that sounds wrong. But the last thing I saw was they expelled all of these diplomats. So it's like the United States, Germany, all the EU, they started expelling diplomats. Now, I don't know what they've said about Brexit. I don't know if Britain has come to some solution for the Irish border. But just so happens, Russia, migrating over to Britain. I don't know if Britain has shown their evidence yet. But I'm going to look it up today to see if they've revealed any evidence on this. Because up to this point, it's just been Theresa May's word for it. So, yeah. So why would 40-plus Democrats have a terrible vote on their record if they were throwing around responsibility to escape voters' anger? Well, I guess, look, my point is, whether they're trying to escape voters' anger or not, all I'm saying is, we are clearly using our military in ways that the military was not designed to be used. We weren't meant to have this military as this kind of sledgehammer to be used all across the globe for our political ends and economic ends in some cases. Why on earth are we helping Saudi Arabia in this? We are not under attack. We are not under threat. The U.S. military is not supposed to be used in a capacity like this. It's illegal. But the problem is, how do you get Congress to actually restrain that and do something about the fact that it's illegal? When Congress doesn't want to do anything or don't care about the fact that it's illegal. For all intents and purposes, they are okay with giving the president, even if that president was a reality show host, all the powers that he wants. It's an amazing phenomenon, but that's exactly what takes place. Exactly what takes place. All right, guys, I'm going to end this. Slightly tired, but I have another one after this. I want to get a few of these in before tonight's over with. So I'll see you guys in about 15-20 minutes. Thanks, everyone. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through Patreon. And let me make sure I didn't miss any of these. I'd rather see fist fights on the Senate floor and Mitch McConnell retreating into his shell than see anyone called Ted Cruz my esteemed colleague. But that's exactly what they do, Balthazar. It doesn't matter how gross the person is. My esteemed colleague on the left. But you know why they do that? They do that because they know that they're having these contentious debates and they're trying to use language in a way that doesn't escalate conflict, if that makes sense. Like it's almost like the psychological use of language, particularly when you're on the floor. These guys are your opponents. But fact is, the government doesn't run if you don't have those opponents being able to work in tandem and make deals and interact with one another on good terms. Now, if from a philosophical basis, you would think that this will work in a representative way. The fact is, it doesn't work in that way. You've added money to the process, meaning money is ensconced in the political process. What gets voted on, what gets chosen, what gets manipulated and moved around, what gets talked about are things that relate to the people who are given the cash, not necessarily everybody else. So yeah, the original idea of the system may have been one way, but the way the system works in practice, once you add in competitive edge and people trying to get an advantage, is completely different. And it's not necessarily for our betterment. If you're talking about the 99%. I showed the thing showing that all of the money that was dedicated, top 1%, like 90% of the wealth, or 95% of the wealth went to the top 1%. In the same way that the jobs that Obama was, chest thumping about and everything else, 95% of those were low wage or part-time. Just saying. Just saying. Alright. Yeah. All the videos and images, all the videos are in below. It should be in the box themselves if you want to look at the stories and where I'm getting my information from. So, I'll leave it at that. Alright, guys. Thank you very much. I'll see you in 15-20 minutes.